Great, thank you so much. It's lovely hearing Ahmad talk because I spent 18 years at ONS. And that actually explains why I'm also glad to be here, because I've spent most of my career kind of as a fraudster, really. 18 years at ONS when I wasn't a statistician, 9 years at the Financial Times when I haven't been trained as a journalist. My undergrad is geography, my master's is GIS. I am back with my people, so that's very good, right? But the FT, I mean, I really wanted to talk a little bit about kind of how we use maps as part of the news telling process. It's something that's got a deep tradition, not necessarily a very long tradition at the FT. And in fact, what I thought I would do is I would start off with a little teaser of what I think is the very earliest map that I can find in the FT's archives, and I wonder if anyone can guess roughly when that map was published. How's your knowledge of historical European boundaries?
1912.
Well, that is very, very good, because this is our exclusive competition map from 1914. Right, so this was a competition map with the very fun task of sketching the boundaries of the states according to your view of probable peace terms once this short war is over. Now, I don't have any information on how many people entered it and how many people kind of got it right, but I do think this map probably can claim to be two things. Possibly the first ever interactive map published by a news organisation, and secondly, probably the newspaper competition with the highest fatality rate in terms of people who weren't alive by the time the competition had finished. So from that inauspicious start, I do need to reassure you that we love maps, and we do take them very, very seriously. I lead a very talented visual and data journalism team at the FT, which has got a lot of geography and GIS thinking embedded at its core. And I think you can tell we've changed the way that we approach cartography, obviously over the years, from hand-drawn maps to manually digitized maps to much more automated and kind of dynamic maps that we're now producing in the sort of recent era. But underpinning all of it is a sense of how place matters when you tell the news. And I think it makes a difference. So when the government of El Salvador issue a fancy press release about their new mega prison, it instantly bemuses half of the world of journalism, especially those people on opinion desks who suddenly say, the scale of this is too difficult to comprehend. Well, not really, that's your job. You're reporting the news. You've got to tell people about the scale of it. All of the numbers on, I'm not going to name and shame this, but if you're good on your fonts, you can guess who this is. All the numbers on here are nonsense. The density figures calculated are terrible. This just doesn't add up. It's a complete thing. So what we did was we did what geographers would do. We asked Planet to fly a satellite over the unopened prison. We analysed videos, we digitised the building footprints, we analysed videos of what the buildings were being used for, and we calculated actually that each detainee, if they filled it up to capacity, would have 0.6 square metres of cell space, which is less than the space that you need to transport cattle in the EU, right? So our take on it was very different. It's a very small mega prison, right? Because of that's not what they were saying in the press release. And you can tell that when we start to tell, thinking like a cartographer really helps you to articulate stories. So this is from our own internal kind of cartographic standards documentation that we have about map projections. We really bring that out to play whenever there's a story where it makes a difference. So azimuthal equidistant projections that allow us to compare the length of non-stop flights in different parts of the world. Yes, that's what cartography is for. My main contribution to the FT, though, because we've got brilliant cartographers, and I kind of acquired a reputation for telling people not to map things. Like, journalists very often are obsessed with mapping things or asking the graphics desk for a map because they've got some data that's got city names in it. So, like, it needs to be a map because it's got Dublin in it, right? This is a graphic on the left that was requested from someone who wanted to show which cities were poised to take over from London as the banking capital of the EU after Brexit. And they said, oh, we also really want you to see which banks are already really well federated across Europe. Well, good luck trying to do that on the map. Explaining to the editors that it doesn't really matter where Dublin is in relation to Luxembourg on this map. No one's going to use this map to plan their holiday. Take the geography away and lay out the information in a better way. So sort of fewer maps but better maps kind of was the mantra. Now, to help in that thinking and to think of cartography and spatial data as part of a broader design process for data visualization, we conceived this thing at the FT called the visual vocabulary. You can kind of think of it as a visual thesaurus for representing data. And it was really quite funny because we designed this as a sort of framework for making decisions at pace in the newsroom. And then the more we worked with it, the more I thought, you know, I wish I'd seen this earlier in my professional development. So we ended up printing off a copy of this for every secondary school in Britain and distributing it through the Royal Geographical Society. It's a big poster. Put it on the wall and have conversations about data with it. It's a really simple sort of idea. The really interesting thing to sort of point out about that is it's a taxonomy that kind of encourages people to think about visualizing data based on the patterns in data that they really want to try and emphasize. And of course, one of those patterns is spatial, right? Obviously, the realization being that when you focus on spatial, you're conceding some ability to maybe show other attributes and characteristics in the data, as we just saw. We started writing a lot of this down for readers because we suddenly realized that the FT has a very busy work and careers desk. It's to help people develop their skills in their day-to-day jobs. We suddenly got lots of emails from readers saying, we're having exactly the same trouble, right? Like, tell us how you're overcoming them. So we wrote a whole series of articles for our readers about, I mean, these are some of the ones about data visualization generally, these ones specifically about maps and cartography and spatial data. A lot of that was then distilled into this book, which was like a summary of like a 5-year process at the FT about how we shifted from thinking about data and maps as decoration and more as things that could drive narrative in the stories that we were working on. And I think, you know, readers appreciate maps more than ever. I'm not going to go into detail on these particular pages because, frankly, I have looked at them a lot and they're not the most inspiring maps in terms of what the human sort of condition can do. But these are among the most read FT pages in history, right? The fact that people specifically want to gravitate to maps to understand the real-world canvas of what is playing out, okay? So maps, incredibly important. They also are natural vehicles for telling stories. Sometimes you need very, very little words, very few words to tell the story. So when war first broke out, when Russia invaded Ukraine, we were very interested in what was happening to Roman Abramovich, and in particular, his super yachts, which we tracked via marine traffic to understand that he had a plan very early on about how he was going to stop his super yachts being impounded. And this was so lovely to just sort of say, well, look, how many words would it take to write what was going on here when you could just show people and say, just follow the data, just watch it move. Maps are also such an important part of explaining very complex things, complex systems. This beautiful animated map by Steve Bernard kind of shows you exactly the sort of stuff that we kind of do in this space. And I think where Steve's really, really clever in how he does this is he uses annotations on the animation very, very carefully to step people through what would otherwise be the sort of thing where you think, well, I need lots of graphics to explain what's going on here, or just some very gentle animation that's not very fast. It's not going to give you motion sickness, but it's just gentle enough for you to really tune into the fairly horrifying story in terms of what's happening with extreme temperatures. And again, these are maps working in full narrative mode. Elections. We've had a lot of them this year, right? And this is really interesting. One of the things that happens is With elections, they're obviously generally set pieces. Like, for example, we know the US election is coming up in November, and we can plan for it, and there's a whole load of work, but we'll go on for that. But then there's also news stories that come out of election stories. And this particular one, it involves kind of mobilizing at pace. So I was just about to leave the newsroom one evening at 5 p.m. when someone came in and said, quick, we've got a story going up in 1 hour about how Labour are sending their activists away from the seats that the Lib Dems are targeting against the Tories. And they'd collected a load of data in spreadsheet form about who was being sent where, and it made it a really nice candidate, again, for producing a map that told the story, right? Like one narrative headline and just follow the arrows. And what I like about that was that people on Twitter, Andy Cartography here, said, this is really a very interesting map. It gets us away from all of the standard constituency hex maps, because of course hex maps is what people are into. But of course, hex maps is actually quite a US and UK kind of obsession. It's really interesting. And when we had, I say elections are set pieces, the French called a snap one the same week as the UK one, which gave us a very interesting week to cover. And it was really interesting to see that in the first round of the French election, these maps were everywhere. This is basically very, very standard reporting. We know the whole issue with this sort of map in the way that rural areas come through larger. And it was really surprising to me that a lot of European news agencies who were covering these elections weren't thinking around that problem in the way that we've obsessed for years in the US and the UK. And actually, we ended up creating our own hex map for round 2, which pulls out the Ile-de-France, which is the central area there in France, which looks tiny on the first round map. I'm sure Marine Le Pen has got that map on her wall in the way that Trump had his map on the wall in Washington. And you can see on the hex map version for the second round here what a transformation there was between round 1 and round 2. Really, really important. So, that's part 1 of this talk, because this is a talk of 2 halves. The second half is very different. I will join them back together again at the end. One of the challenges with doing cartography in the newsroom, sorry, I'm conscious I keep leaning down and losing half of you. One of the challenges in the newsroom is the challenge of responsive web design. We need to make our maps work on all devices. And in fact, it's kind of more demanding than that. We need to make them work because most of our readers are now reading the news on mobile devices. And that's a problem. All the talk today about big maps, luxuriate in the size of mapping and the kind of physicality of the mapping, that's a problem. And I think it's a huge problem for consuming news content, because this paper here, I think, gives us, this article here gives us a really interesting take on it, which is as soon as you start staring at content on small screens, it changes your emotional engagement with it. Okay, so who wants to see less emotional engagement in maps? Not me, right? I think that there's a bit of a problem. So, part 2 of this presentation, I'll try and keep it short, but this is the fascinating bit for me. Does anybody know who this is? It is. It's Bill Phillips of Phillips Curve economics fame. And this is him with trademark cigarette in hand in 1950, shortly after he introduced his economic computer to the world. So this, for those of you who don't know this machine, you can go see it in the Science Museum. It's an analog computer that executes 9 simultaneous differential equations representing Keynesian economics that allow you to basically change the flow of money around the economy. It's an amazing invention. And you go see it at the Science Museum. They only ever made 14 of them, 3 of which are left working. For me, it was almost the ultimate example of the physicality of data visualization. You've got all of this dyed pink water that rushes through this machine. If you enter your data visualization, it's like a living Sankey diagram. I know what you're thinking. Alan, this is a Cartographic conference. why are you showing us this kind of machine? We had a go a few years ago at making a digital version of it. And what killed off the digital version was this. You can't turn a 7-foot water-powered computer, the pump of which came from a Lancaster bomber, right? Amazing. You can't turn that into a mobile app. And that's a problem because the value of Philips's machine was that it showed you complex systems at work. What happens in the economy when something moves here? What happens over here? If I pull this, what does it affect elsewhere? And that's exactly what he was trying to do. Show complex systems. Show it all in one go. So what's it doing at a Cartographic conference? Well, tenuous claim number one, having heard about Beck earlier, actually, if you divide it into three, this machine, it's actually a map of how money flows through the economy of London. There's a government function on the left-hand side, there's a consumption function running through the middle, and there's a central banking function on the right-hand side. Right? So it's a very abstracted model of the economy that you can kind of treat as a sort of pseudo-geographic thing. But the other thing is, this black and white picture is not a picture of the actual machine. It's a picture of a 3D CGI model that we made of it in Maya when we visited one of the last original working machines in Cambridge last year. And making a 3D model of it gave us some ideas about what we could do with it. This is the crew. We went to Cambridge and measured everything with this model in kind of great detail. The resulting kind of output of which I'll show you in my living room, which is, there's this thing called Apple Vision Pro, which allows you to build virtual reality objects and drop them into physical space. And so what we've done is modeled the original Philips machine into an interactive Apple Vision Pro app, which went live in the store this morning, actually. I'm really happy about that. You're the first people to really hear about that. And what that means is you can get hands-on with it. So this is it in our kind of basement. People didn't know what I was doing in the basement. I had my headset on and I was going like this. This is me controlling the flow of pink water around the economy by just pinching and dragging. And the fidelity of the model is stunning. Right? Like the physicality of the experience. It takes you back to this idea that data can be an aesthetic experience, not something that has to be minified onto a 4-inch screen. And so this is my wrap-up, right? It's an experiment, but I think one that's very interesting in terms of what that means, particularly for cartographic thinking, is that Apple don't call it a mixed reality headset. They don't even call it a headset. What they call it is spatial computing. And I think that's a phrase that should appeal to cartographers, because I think there's all sorts of lovely creative opportunities wrapped up in that. In particular, near my neck of the woods, over at Petworth House in Sussex, you've got things like this. Massive, tactile, geographical objects that, look at this, are under lock and key, just like the Philips machine. No one gets to touch these things that were designed to be touched, right? And I know we've got a lovely talk coming later on physical cartography. You know, in many ways that's even better than the virtual reality. But the thing that I like with the virtual reality is we can control that through data just like we can any other kind of web-based medium. But that's kind of like my parting thought is I think there's plenty of things to learn from looking back and thinking about how we can relearn that in a modern context. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Very interesting talk. And actually a use for the Apple Vision, which is...
Believe me, right, the top app at the moment allows you to put ghosts in your house that surprise you. I should say, I actually have Apple Vision Pro with me today. So during the break, if anybody wants to give the machine a try, if you've not tried it before, you know, come over and have a chat. If you've got like expensive gold embossed maps to trade for 5 minutes with Apple Vision Pro, again, then that would be great. But I'm more than happy during the break to, if people want to have a little look at it. Yeah.
Financial Times sales. Okay, so does anyone have any questions? It's supposed to be one or two. Okay.
Thanks, Alan. I mean, you and I have talked about this before, but you know, I'm slightly bitter about all this stuff because in the good old days, you know, we'd be the innovators and you guys would pick it up and then publish it and say all this great innovation that's going on. And now you guys are kind of streets ahead of the rest of us, I think, in a lot of ways, in the way that you've been able to build such a successful, creative environment. So my question really was, you know, what from your perspective, looking out, you know, what are the things that you are interested in seeing from the wider world in terms of inspiration and innovation that you think the newsroom probably doesn't do as well as it does?
So, I mean, I think some of this comes back, part of the answer is linked to what Ken was saying about where do ideas come from, right? I think what we need generally are far more meeting points for ideas, where things will come together. You know, Ahmed will know this from his ONS experience, but back in the day, ONS, before it had been affected by the data viz bug, used to have a job that their job was just to put the numbers out. A factory for producing numbers, leave numbers by back door, and someone will pick it up and work with it. That's not where the best ideas are going to come from with that sort of mindset. What you want is if you've got something that you think has got great value that could do with being liberated and reused in different contexts and mashed up with different things, you need to create the meeting points for that to happen. And I mean, we've talked about this because of obviously our connection via the Social Data Institute, that great ideas come from everywhere. And one of the things that I love about the Philips machine project that we've done is we couldn't execute that project on our own originally. You know, we got so far and we kind of paused it until we thought we had a better solution lined up. And then we ended up creating a really nice multidisciplinary team to solve the problem like years after. So yeah, just meeting points and ways of interacting and kind of opening up to ideas, yeah.
Another question? No?
I think there was one over there.
Okay.
Very quickly, I'm just kind of curious, how much of you and your staff's time is on like rapid response things, like they can map an hour for something versus people who's longer form products?
Yeah, we've changed the way we do that now. So what we have is we now have a dedicated team that concentrates on medium to long-term projects. Well, actually two teams. One that does visual storytelling, a kind of sister team that does visual investigations. That has like a core team whose work is on sort of medium to long-term projects, but we will parachute members of the wider team on a project-by-project basis into that environment. And then we have a smaller rolling rota that covers the news. You know, on the day that I did that Lib Dem map, I thought I'd got away with one by having a relatively quiet news day, and I was just collared as I was leaving the room. And then I thought, well, I get to make a map anyway, right? But the pace of it, on the rapid response stuff, is extraordinary. I mean, I think one of the things we've realised is it just needs to be fast, right? The moment the assassination attempt happened on Trump, you're straight onto satellite imagery to try and understand the geography of the shooter relative to the stage and kind of mapping out that whole space. And what you end up doing is iterating at pace very, very quickly. Basic stuff replaced an hour or two later by something more substantial, replaced by something a day or two later where you've had more time to build it out. Yeah.
I just had a question about, so with the Philips machine, we kind of skipped from an original type prototype to, you know, this kind of Vision Pro exclusive. And I wondered if were there other iterations in between, like trying to abstract and modeling something you could use on a mobile, or, you know, I sort of really want to touch it on my own device, but I don't have a Vision Pro. So.
Yeah, it's a very good point. When we did the first version of it was an iPad-based teaser that I showed at Davos back in January. My feel was we wanted to go, I think the problem is when you got a new platform like this, your temptation is to build something for mobile and then just port it over. And that brings along with it a whole load of baggage of all the decisions you've made in the last 10 to 20 years about how to design for mobile, and then you just try and adapt it. So we wanted to build something from the ground up for virtual reality that was a faithful recreation of the original machine. I'd paused the project, I'd watched the arrival of all of the different headsets over the last few years and thought, nah, not interested. But I watched the Apple Vision Pro keynote because of the quality of the interface in terms of the sort of display and the spatial audio. It has like these bone conducting speakers that sit here. That really give you a very, very immersive experience. Like your senses are convinced it's there. And so once I tried that, I thought, I'm not even going to try and build this on mobile because it would be such a degradation of experience. I think Philips would turn in his grave if he thought I took in his 7-foot machine and turned it into a 3-inch display or whatever. Yeah.
I think we've probably run out of time there. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.